Due to my strange occupation, I spent most of my time traveling and meeting new people. Most forget about our trivial meetings, but some linger, sensing that they can trust me with some story that they would like to get off their chest. A story they cannot tell anyone else. A story that haunts them or one that they wish to forget. I collect these stories as I travel for work. I am unaware what qualities I hold that make other people feel at ease enough to spill their soul to a stranger. Perhaps they can sense that no matter how outlandish the tale, I'll believe them. The other day, I literally bumped into a woman coming out of a corner store. She dropped her drink, and when I collected it to return it to her, she stared at me. I knew in that moment she could sense that I was a person that she could unload an experience that had been troubling her. Unfortunately, I could not stick around and hear it. I was in a hurry, and that was the reason why I ran directly into her in the first place. But I gave her my business card to call me later that night or the following day. I do not make a habit of giving out my number to people who only want to give me tales and not work. But for her, I made a quick exception. She did call me later that night, and I had time to hear what had been troubling her for over a year. With her permission, she allowed me to write down her story. I of course changed the names and made the locations as vague as possible for her sake. I tried to keep this in her words as much as possible. I only thought to write this down after I had heard it, so I may have forgotten every word spoke, but it should be very close to what had been said. I think she was relieved that somebody believed what she had said, and it does not matter to me if you believe this tale or not. This is simply just what I heard that night. A year ago, maybe more, I had been proposed to by my high school sweetheart. He had been the only person that I had ever dated, and I wasn't aware of any warning signs that started to appear in our relationship. In my defense, they weren't very big warning signs either. Things I could easily ignore or sweep under the rug, believing that because we loved each other, everything was going to be fine. Bill would stay out some nights, which I assumed he took extra hours at his job, and crashed at a friend's place. He spent a bit too much money on booze most weekends, or for takeout when we just barely were paying our rent. When he did propose, he bought the cheapest ring, which I was fine with, but his mother had asked what happened to the ring that belonged to his grandmother that he had been given when she had passed away. His excuse was that he had it in a safe. It was a very expensive ring, and he didn't want to risk it getting lost. Again, in his defense, I had a bad habit of losing earrings and misplacing my keys every so often. I agreed with him about the ring being in a safe spot. We could hand it down to our children when the time come. But he didn't sound very happy over the children idea. When the subject came up, he always found a way to make me drop it. Planning weddings are stressful, anyone can tell you that. I had friends he hated and didn't want to come, and I thought some of his friends were a bad influence. I didn't care about him drinking with them, but I heard rumors that the group of friends had started to deal drugs during those parties, and I didn't want Bill anywhere near something like that, let alone the risk of having the cops called at our wedding because his friends had decided to deal out of the bathrooms or something like that. After we had started to disagree on one thing for the wedding, we found ourselves disagreeing about nearly everything. I found it much easier to just go along with what he wanted instead of arguing. The last day that I spent with Bill was when he had driven to where we wanted our reception to be held. I found the location just fine. It was a beautiful apple orchard. A strange location for us though. We were both city folk, but his uncle had owned the orchard. We could have our reception there for cheap, and it was a great location. Aside from how far of the drive it was really perfect. I had thought that we could go one day without having some sort of disagreement about the wedding, but I was mistaken. On the drive home, the topic of who to invite came up again. It was the biggest fight that we had. I never raised my voice, but I was so adamant about his group of friends not coming that I found myself red in the face yelling right back at him, pleading for him to understand. Everything that we had ever argued about came out then. On a dark highway with no other cars surrounded by trees, he silenced me by spitting out every hateful thing that he had been holding back and letting fester. I had never been so deeply cut by somebody's words before. I never knew that he had been angry over how he felt I apparently was pressing him for children, or how I had let myself go after high school, or how I burdened him forcing him to work so often, even though I worked 2 part-time jobs trying to support us. And after months of looking, I couldn't find any better paying places that were hiring. Every statement was a dagger stabbing into my heart. Everything that was wrong in our lives, he had put the blame on me. I think it was because it was so much easier for him to blame than face his own mistakes and his shortcomings. And because of his tirade, I had started to cry, a wailing kind of cry that I just couldn't hold back. The stress of the past few months had finally came to the surface. Bill did something that I never expected from him. With one hand on the wheel, he hit me with the other so hard that I bounced my head against my window. The shock and pain made me stop crying. Once I fully realized what had happened, I felt the urge to sob even harder bubble up inside me, but I forced it down out of the fear of him hitting me again. "We shouldn't be together," I said softly, but I knew that he heard it. He stayed silent with a calm rage on his face, an expression to this day that still gives me chills thinking about. I'm positive that he was planning on killing me in that moment. I don't know what happened that made him hate me so much. I kept my eyes on him as my body shook. On the dark road before us was empty of cars, but at the last moment I saw it. A deer. It had walked out onto the road that our headlights were illuminating. Bill had time to drive into the other lane. If we were lucky, the deer would run to the left and we could avoid it. And it did run to the left. But Bill purposely swerved to hit the poor creature. My head bounced off the dashboard, causing me to see stars and black out for a few moments. The deer crashed and went over our car, cracking our windshield and denting the front, but it didn't do too much damage otherwise. I have no idea why our airbags didn't go off. Bill screeched to a stop at the side of the road, swearing up a storm. We both sat breathing heavy, trying to process what had just happened. Bill had tried to kill both of us. We knew, but neither would say it out loud. Once I was seeing straight again, I scrambled out of the car. I don't know if it was to get away from Bill or if it was to check on the deer. My forehead was bleeding from how hard that I had hit it, but I ignored it. The poor deer was in the middle of the road, broken and twisted, but it was twitching and still alive. I limped over to it. My seatbelt dug into my body when we had hit the poor creature. My pain was nothing compared to the deer. I knew that I couldn't do anything for it, but I still felt the need to be beside it. I sat on my knees beside the deer, its big eyes looking up at me, its ears moving, but because its neck was broken, it couldn't move anything else. I wanted to cry for it. I felt like it was my fault that it had been hit. If I hadn't agreed to marry Bill, we wouldn't have been driving on this road at this time and it would be safe. I silently said an apology to it, petting its head softly not to harm or panic it any further. And Bill was coming towards us. He was openly threatening to kill me if I didn't get back into the car. He looked furious. I knew that he would hurt me, but I stayed by the deer. I needed to be beside it while it died. It was my fault after all. I felt the tears coming back to my eyes, causing my vision to blur as I watched Bill stride ever closer in the red light that the car's rear lights gave off. I thought my only hope to live through the night was the chance if another car came down the road and it saw our car pulled over and myself and the deer in the middle of the road. But I was wrong. A wind blew through the forest surrounding us, and at first, I thought the movement in the trees across the road was just that. Trees blowing through the wind. I heard a sound that was very much like the branches hitting each other in a strong breeze, but it sounded off somehow, That strange sound made me look up and over, and then up some more. My mind didn't piece together what I was seeing at first. It looked like some tree branches were rising above the others, but the branches were too big to be a part of any tree that I had ever seen. It was only when I saw the rest of the figure's head I knew what I was looking at. Towering over the dark trees and silhouetted against the moon was a deer head. Large antlers were what I saw rising up at first. It was so dark that I only saw the shape of it. Even Bill stopped when he followed my line of sight. That head was too large, too impossibly large. It had to be a trick of the night or something else. No deer could be taller than the trees. And then the deer figure opened its eyes. Countless eyes made of silver lights, all different shapes and sizes, all looking down at us. Eyes made of moonlight covering its entire dark head. I should have been frightened. Such a thing couldn't be real, and yet we were both seeing it. And yet, strangely, I was in awe of the creature. The creature raised its head even more, the strange groaning noise coming with it. It then made a noise so loud that it shook my entire body. I thought my eardrums would burst from the sound. My bones creaked under the weight of such a noise. I'm not a religious person, but I do think this is what the trumpet that sounded the end of days would be like. Bill dropped to his knees, holding his ears and doing his best to drown the horrible sound out. Even after it ended, neither of us recovered for a few minutes. While we were reeling, eyes started to appear in the woods around us, eyes closer to our level. Unable to move, I saw countless deer start slowly coming out of the woods and into the moonlight. But there was something wrong with these deer. All of them were dead, their eyes a glowing milky white, their bodies twisted and rotting. Some had to drag their broken limbs behind. One dragged itself forward with only one working front leg. I could smell them, the horrible smell of death. And Bill saw them starting to surround us and stood on shaking legs. He took a few rough steps towards the car, leaving me behind. He got a few steps from the car before the first deer darted out towards them. It was a female, and then it rammed him so hard that he flew a few feet closer back to me. In a blind panic, he got up, his eyes wide and white with fear. He tried running again, only to have a buck come charging at him, antlers only grazing him but ripping his shirt. Soon Bill was being shoved painfully from deer to deer, some using their hard hooves to knock him aside into the next creature. He finally went down when a hoof caught his jaw, breaking it and knocking teeth from his mouth. He screamed in pain, blood pouring onto the road. The deer stared down at him in a tight circle with their white eyes emotionless. The massive creature in the forest didn't move. It too watched the gruesome scene play out. I couldn't do anything, I couldn't move. I couldn't try and save him. At some point, I had loved that man, but right then, I felt nothing for him as he begged for his life through blood and shattered teeth. He tried crawling away but was quickly stopped by a deer slamming down on his legs and crushing bone. The deer that we had hit had died in front of me. I knew that it was dead, and yet it still stood. Its neck twisted, it started to weakly walk towards Bill. I heard each step getting closer to him. Hooves on the road was the only sound as the rest of the dead deer paused and watched their new member get closer and closer to the one who had killed it. When it reached Bill, he had been able to crawl to nearly the end of the road, leaving a trail of blood behind him. With a great deal of pain, he rolled onto his back to stare up at the creature that stopped right behind him. They both stared at each other, Bill babbling nonsense and spitting blood. The deer did not listen. It did not care for his pleas. It reared up on its hind legs and brought down its front hooves down onto Bill's face. I wanted to look away, and like I said, I had loved this man at one time. Even after everything he had said and done, I felt like I should at least make myself watch his end. I watched as the deer with its broken neck and head swinging wildly bring down its front legs again and again. I heard the impact of the hit onto Bill's skull and his head cracking open. I heard how he tried to scream, only to be cut short. When Bill's skull was nothing but a mashed pile, the deer finally stopped. I was positive that it was my turn next, but the creatures just left. They all dragged their dead bodies back into the woods where they came from. And before I could question anything, I heard that bone-crushing trumpet sound from the massive creature still watching. The sound and pressure were so intense that I blacked out after a few seconds. When I came to, I found myself in the back of an ambulance. I saw flashing lights and smelled burnt plastic and metal. A man I never met before kept telling me everything would be alright and that I was safe to rest. I was so tired. When I woke the second time, I was in a hospital bed. According to what the police had pieced together, Bill and I had gotten into a fight. He dropped me off on the side of the road before speeding off. A truck driver had seen me get kicked out of the car and with a banged-up head. He was going to pull over to see if I was alright when a deer jumped in front of Bill's car. He was still in view, so the truck driver saw the car crash and it catching on fire. However, they never found the deer's body. They had all assumed I was in shock from seeing Bill's death, that they accepted my silent act. I simply nodded and agreed about what events I had been told happened. I had no memories of what I had been told, so it must have been what happened, right? There's no way that dead deer came out of the woods to kill Bill because he was an idiot that killed one of them on purpose. But deep down, I can't shake that memory. It was so real. After they spoke to the truck driver, they never found him again. He had given them a fake name, so I was never able to thank him. The chilling part was the only found body parts of Bill's body. They couldn't explain why only some of his body had burned so thoroughly while others did not, but they still marked the case as closed. I was ready to accept that the whole thing was a stress-induced nightmare. After I had returned from the hospital, I had a dream that I was in the forest surrounded by those dead deer, their dead eyes staring me down. I cried for them. When I woke up at the foot of my bed, there was something that had not been there before, a single antler. I don't know if that was a warning or a thank you, but I kept it. I asked an artist friend to carve something out of the antler to make use of it, and I wear a small pendant from it every day. I may have been saved that night, but I fear what saved me is fickle. The next person might not be so lucky. Whoever meets those creatures may be taken, so take care to notice the deer crossing signs, be careful on the roads at nighttime, and I hope if you do hit a deer, it forgives you. That was mostly what the woman told me. I thanked her for her story. I doubt that she'll ever call me again. Hopefully this helps her move on. I may drop by again with some other stories. I've recently been hearing about this strange person people are calling a half-blood cryptid. I'm very busy with my odd job, but if time willing, I'll write down some other strange events that I've heard about. Roughly a year ago, I found myself finishing a job sooner than I had expected. Due to that, I was stranded in an unfamiliar city without any place to rest in the middle of the night. Thankfully, I was able to find a motel that was open 24 hours. It was a bit run down and I feared how clean the rooms were, but it was better than the street for the night. I walked into the small, empty office to check in. I imagined the clerk was taking a nap, not expecting anybody to show up in the middle of the night. It took him a few minutes to arrive, and in those few minutes, I started to snoop through the magazines on the counter, old things about to be thrown away. I wasn't tired yet and I disliked most TV shows, so I often read in my spare time. I had finished my small stash of paperback books, so I was in need of some reading material that night. In that pile of faded magazines was a notebook, a thin one meant for schoolwork. Interested, I started to flip through it just as the clerk came by to greet me. After getting my room arranged, I had asked about the journal. A guest had left it behind a few days before my arrival. The clerk didn't know who was in the room, only that they had left the journal behind. The room door wide open and the bed pushed against the far wall. They had kept the journal thinking maybe the person was just going out and was coming back to it. Nobody showed up, so the clerk was going to have it tossed out. But I saved him a trip to the recycling bin out back and took the pile of magazines with the journal on top. After I was settled in my room, I started to look through the small journal again. It was a plain one that you could purchase anywhere for $1 or less. The front few pages had been torn out. The rest of the pages was filled with neat handwriting, detailing a story that most would find to be fiction. But I had seen stranger things in this world, and was not as fast to dismiss such stories. I have since given the journal to an acquaintance of mine that collects such things. I only remembered that journal now because I had heard about a person that had appeared in the journal. Since I have the time, it's best that I write down this first. Mind you, it's been a full year since reading this tale, so I may not get all the wording the way that it had been written, but the events are all the same. This happened when I was still in school. It's an event my town hasn't forgotten about. No one but myself knows the truth of what happened. Well, I'm the only human who knows the truth. I was in my last year of school, ready to be free and to enter adulthood. I counted down the days that I could escape this town and go off to college and what I thought at the time, my real life to start. I wasn't the only one. My 2 friends also wanted to get out of the slow and boring town. We all had different plans but swore that we would keep in touch after graduation. To celebrate, we planned to go camping over one of the last long weekends of our teenhood. Everything had been planned out months in advance, funds put aside and booze hidden away from when the time came. The first bump in the road was when Josh had started to date Rebecca. She was loud and the type that could not let any conversations die down or have any pauses. I did find her annoying, but I liked how Josh was happy with her. I didn't think she was really a bad person or I hated her. I just could only spend so much time around her at that time. I never told him, but I think Josh knew. Somehow, she found out about our trip and invited herself along. It was a setback, but I wasn't going to let her ruin our plans. I would just have to find a way to like her. And then our lovable Tristan sprained his arm. He was a big goofball and must have had bones of steel for never breaking one before. His mother was the overprotective sort and nearly didn't let him go into the woods with a sprained arm. I really wish that he had listened to her. We were young and thought that we were immortal. Finally, the day arrived and I was going over my bags, getting ready to get going when the phone rang. My parents answered it, and in the next few minutes they were in a frenzy. I had a sick aunt that lived out of state. She had been in for treatments and I guess wasn't doing very well. My father and mother needed to go and see her, and I had offered to come with. They told me that my aunt would want me to go on my trip after looking forward to so badly. They didn't think that I needed to go with them, but the problem was what to do with my younger brother. He was 13 and unlike Tristan, did not have bones of steel. He was accident prone combined with the worst luck of any person on the planet. Even though he could have been on his own for a night or two, it wasn't worth the risk. If he did hurt himself somehow, somebody needed to be there to get him to the hospital. It was such short notice that none of the people who normally could watch him were available. The only thing we could do was bring him. Bringing your little brother really was lame, but there was nothing that I could do about it. It just meant that I couldn't get wasted as planned. This was back in the days of those clunky flip phones. My dad gave me his in case my brother had broken an ankle or got mauled by a bear, so I could try and call for help. I shoved it into my jacket pocket. Because my parents took the car, we had to walk. It wasn't that far, maybe an hour at most, but it was an hour if you were in high school. My brother had slowed us down and we only arrived at the meeting spot when the sun had started to set. Tristan met me outside the woods and at the start of the trail. He gave me grief for bringing Jesse along, but I think he preferred my brother over Rebecca. Because I was late, they had already set up their tents. Me and Jesse scrambled in the dim light to set ours up. When I arrived, I found it pretty peaceful. Rebecca sat on a log by a fire that Josh had started. She looked a bit pale and I never knew her to stop talking, so I was worried. "Hey, look at these weird flyers we found," Josh said before I could ask about Rebecca. He handed me a few sheets of paper. I had noticed a piece of paper or two stuck to the trees while me and Tristan had walked through the woods, but I didn't stop to read them. Apparently they had found a bunch, but he had used them to start the fire. "Lost in the woods, call this number. Need help, call it. Seeing strange things, yeah, you guessed it. Call this number." Each paper had the same phone number written at the bottom. Josh took the flyers back and tossed them in the fire before I memorized the number. Back then, not everybody had cell phones. I had already forgotten that I had my dad's phone in my pocket. If I did, I think we would have messed around trying to call it. But all of us were unaware of the phone and had just burned the papers. "Hey Jesse, why don't you go and find some more wood for us?" Josh had suggested when he saw my brother was already getting bored. The child took off holding a flashlight, glad to be trusted by an older person to do an important job. I got stressed over not being able to see Jesse or him going off into the woods, but he was smart enough to stay in sight of us. "You feeling all right, Rebecca?" I finally asked. As Jesse was going back and forth between the edge of the woods and dumping twigs, the three of us started to talk about school, but Rebecca stayed staring at the fire. She nodded at times but didn't contribute to the conversation. It was so out of character for her. "All right," she said, not looking at me. She doesn't have a fever, just tired, I guess," Josh told us and wrapped an arm around her. "Just tired," she said with a nod but still looked out of it. Maybe we should just take her back," I suggested and started to stand up. It was already dark, but I could find my way out of the woods if I followed the path with a flashlight. I didn't want him to think that I wanted her gone, but I was worried about her. "No." Her head shot up and she gave me a dark glare and it made me freeze. Something was not right with her. She must have realized how odd she was acting, so she forced her face into a strained smile. "Just tired," she said again, sounding a bit more natural and like herself. Tristan didn't like the tension, and to break the mood, he brought out the marshmallows. Jesse magically appeared when the treats came out, and soon Rebecca's odd mood had been forgotten. The next few hours were a good time. We made s'mores, roasted marshmallows, and dared each other to eat them when they were still on fire. Our plan was to drink, but we only had like a beer each. Jesse tried a sip and gagged on the taste. I hoped the experience would turn him off from drinking until he was old enough. Even with these slight hiccups in our plan, we had a good time. Hours of chatting and sharing dumb stories, talking about future plans. When Rebecca had decided to turn in, I thought it would be best if we had an early night. I put Jesse into our tent and stayed outside to help Josh chop some firewood. And Tristan still had a sore arm, so we went to a small single tent next to mine, leaving us the work. We knew that if we didn't do it that night, we would be too tired or lazy in the morning. Josh brought a small hand axe to make it easier. It didn't take very long to make a decent-sized pile. Jesse did a good job of finding small branches, but we needed bigger pieces to keep the fire going. I don't remember what my last word had been to Josh. Most nights I sit awake trying to think what I had said to him when he went into his tent, or if I said anything at all to him. As last hours with her friends go, I had a good few. Inside the tent was a little bit crammed with me and Jesse. Somehow, I was able to sleep for an hour, but because of the small space, Jesse woke me up when he sat up. He crawled on me trying to find the flashlight. I was a little annoyed being woken up. "What are you doing?" I whispered in case everybody else was sleeping. "I need to pee," Jesse whispered back. I groaned. I didn't need to go, but I couldn't let Jesse go out on his own and get eaten by some wild animal. For some reason, a mental image of a monster-sized owl swooping down and just taking my brother away made me snort laugh. Knowing his luck, that would happen to Jesse. "I'll come with you." I got up and grabbed my jacket. And getting out and stretching, I waited for Jesse to start walking. Our fire was still going weakly. Jesse had turned on the flashlight and swept the beam of light into the woods, testing it out. I saw a flicker of white in the light and thought that it was another one of those weird flyers stuck to a tree. I stared at the white shape, trying to make it out right, and was distracted when I heard Josh's tent open. Staring at the white shape in the darkness, I saw it move. I was so sure that it was just paper fluttering in the wind. But then another white shape came from behind a different tree. And then another. Next to me, Jesse screamed. On reflex, I wrapped an arm around him and shot my head over towards Josh's tent to see what had scared my brother so much. Rebecca stood barefoot looking at us. "Just tired," she said in a strained voice that did not belong to Rebecca. Her front was covered in so much blood that it dripped into the dirt below. She still had her face, but her body looked too skinny and too pale. Long twisted fingers reached out towards us and she took a stumbling step closer. "No, just tired." Everything happened at once. Tristan came shooting out of his tent to see what the scream was about. He stared in shock at Rebecca and couldn't do anything when a blur of white came shooting out of the dark woods and in on top of him. I darted forward to grab the axe beside the fire pit, but let go of Jesse when I did. My dumb little brother ran. He ran screaming into the woods, still holding the flashlight. I had an awful decision to make, one that I still regret to this day. A creature was on top of Tristan, my dear friend, screaming and struggling to get it off of him. It was deathly thin and pale, its mouth filled with countless teeth, snapping and trying to get a bite out of his face. Rebecca still hadn't moved. I saw more faces of the pale creatures slowly coming out from behind the trees. Axe in hand, I grabbed the thing off Tristan and pulled it off him. I swung the axe into its neck, causing it to squeal horribly. Tristan looked up at me with a shockful and thankful look, but I left him. I don't think I killed the thing that had attacked him. I just turned and ran after one swing. I could still hear and see Jesse, so I couldn't stay and help Tristan. I don't know what happened to him after I left him behind. I wasn't even aware enough to realize that I was still holding the axe, leaving him defenseless. I could only hope that he got up and ran. I caught up to my screaming and crying brother. I grabbed his hand and we ran together, flying past more and more paper, stuck to trees and not stopping to read them. Each paper a pale white, making us think that those creatures were still coming after us. We saw some figures, but they were moving towards our camp for that moment. We ran in a panic. When I finally made us slow down, I realized in horror that we didn't know where we were. We had gotten lost in such a short amount of time. Jesse was sobbing but had run so much that he couldn't get enough air in to cry loud enough. My head darted around looking for more creatures. Keeping a grip on Jesse's hand, I made us walk, trying to find the trail. By sheer luck, we didn't come across any more creatures but found ourselves in a clearing. The full moon giving us enough light to see by, so I made Jesse turn the flashlight off to save batteries and to not let the creatures see us. I let him cry as quiet as he could. I didn't blame him. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw White and raised the axe. On a tree beside us was a piece of paper that had not been there before, paper that I had mistaken for a monster. As I stared at it, writing appeared. Lost in the woods, being chased by monsters, a little brother with you. Your name is Cal. If that's you, call Jake. No, really, call me. Under the words was the same phone number as before. It was just too weird though. Yeah, being chased by a monster was scary, but this was even weirder. I was wearing my jacket and had the phone in my pocket. I didn't think that we had anything to lose by calling the number. Our situation couldn't get much worse, right? Of course, I first tried to dial 911, but static only came through. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number. A single ring next to me made us both jump. "You kiddos need some help." I pulled Jesse into a protective grip when I heard the voice. Beside us was a person that had not been there before, a flip phone still in my ear. Even in the situation that we were in, I didn't trust the stranger. They were wearing a black coat so large that it wasn't practical. The sleeves hung close to the ground and the collar covered half their face. By their voice and what was visible of their face, I couldn't tell what gender they were. But if this was Jake as mentioned on the paper, then I'm guessing they were a guy. Jake was tall and only took 2 steps to get in front of us, staring down over the collar of the coat. Red hair covered half of Jake's face and the right eye. The left eye was a deep glowing red that made me realize that I was not dealing with somebody human. "Can you help us?" Jesse whimpered and I held onto him tighter. "Well, sure I can," Jake purred, looking pleased by our fearful state. I saw more creatures' faces off in the distance through the trees. They looked weary of the newcomer, but I knew that they would come towards us soon. My distrust was forgotten when I saw the faces of the pale creatures starting to surround us. "Please save us from those Wendigos," I begged. I didn't actually know what those creatures were, so the first monster name that came to my mind spilled out. "They're not Wendigos," Jake stated point blank. "That doesn't matter." I spat out my anxiety spiking when a pale face came even closer through the trees. "Oh, it does. If you say, 'Oh please, Jake, just save us from some Wendigos,' I'm bound to only save you from Wendigos. These things could eat you and I could do nothing. Wording is important, you know." I was half listening to Jake, but I still got the point. Jesse was clinging on to me as he started to freak out over just how close the creatures had gotten. A brave one had gotten only a tree away. It stared at us with dead eyes, with its mouth wide and drool dripping to the forest floor. "Please save us from these things trying to eat us," I said quickly, my voice pitching in panic. "What would you two give me in exchange for saving you?" Jake asked, a red eye gleefully looking down at us. "Anything," I shrieked as a creature finally jumped towards us, its twisted long fingers reaching out ready to tear us apart. I was desperate and so overcome with fear that I didn't think of what I had promised to give. I only wanted us to get out of those woods. I was convinced the pale creature was going to reach us. It was so close to my face that I could feel its rancid breath, but then it suddenly was gone. Jake had moved so fast that I didn't even see what had happened. One moment I was a second away from having my face bitten off, and then the next, the creature had its head crushed into a tree, and the pale body limp on the ground. "Hold my coat." The coat was tossed at us, but I let it drop, being in shock of what had just happened. I stared at the dead creature and then looked around to see the rest retreating further back after one of their members had been killed. They still stared at us through the darkness, but almost looked scared, jittering through the trees. "You're a girl?" I asked Jake, letting the first question that came to my mind slip out. There was a lot more pressing matters at hand, but for some reason that was what my brain had wanted to say. Jake had a scar over the right side of her mouth that exposed teeth, and twisted her top lip, making her have a forever smirk. She was only wearing black shorts and a sports bra, and she was skinny. Skinny enough for me to see all of her ribs, but oddly enough, her arms looked muscled. "Wrap the coat around yourself. It'll cover up your smell and protect you from those things trying to bite you. I need to attract them to me and put them into a frenzy to take all of them out at once." Jake reached out and took my jacket sleeve and pulled so quickly that it easily tore off. I was a bit annoyed, but I let her. She then roughly took my hand and I cursed when she cut a deep gash into the palm, letting the jacket sleeve soak up the blood as she offered no apology. Jessie looked worried but also was too traumatized to react. When the sleeve was wet enough, Jake tied it around her forearm and walked away from us into the middle of the clearing that we had stumbled into. I quickly wrapped me and Jessie under the large coat. I poked my head out at the top so that I could still see what was going on. The creature had started to make hissing noises when my hand was cut. They could smell the fresh blood and they no longer were scared of Jake. They only wanted to find the source of the smell so that they could finally eat. With Jessie safely under the coat and my arms wrapped around him, holding as tight and close as possible, I watched what on earth Jake was going to do. Standing in the middle of the clearing, she waited for the creatures to come closer. The moon was full so that I could see what was happening perfectly. A blur of white darted out towards her only to be slammed down into the ground. Without giving it time to recover, Jake twisted its head clean off. That gave me some hope of living through the night. She was strong enough to swat away the monsters that had killed my friends. Motivated by the smell of blood, 2 more creatures came at her. They screamed a horrible sound that made my stomach turn to ice. One of them cut Jake's shoulder before it went down, but she didn't seem to notice in the slightest. In fact, she was smiling. In a short time, I could no longer count the number of pale forms in the woods around the clearing, and I soon realized what our downfall could be. Jake was strong but could not deal with the sheer number of monsters coming for her. If more than 3 came at her at once, she would get cut or harmed before she would kill her attackers. I watched my fear returning as 2 more took a fallen one's place. Jake took a brutal cut across her stomach from the creature's claws, but for some reason she started to laugh again. Every cut she received, she started to laugh harder. Tossing dead and torn apart creatures, her laughter grew to a crazed shriek. Jessie started to shake under the coat, not seeing what I was, but the laughter was scaring him. He had no idea what was going on and thought that a new monster had appeared. I held him, forcing myself to not worry. Jake was on our side. We would live through the night. That was all that mattered. What I saw next made me completely doubt that fact. Something else came out of the forest, and it made the remaining creatures scatter and try to get away, only to be caught and scooped up by the new monster's many arms. It had somewhat of a human shape. Countless human arms lined each side of its body, human legs twisting together to make a pair supporting its massive weight. Its head was made up of skulls and half-decayed faces. When it snatched up a creature, alive or dead, the bundle of heads parted to show a ring of sharp teeth. It tossed whole bodies down into the deep, endless-looking mouth. I had no idea how Jake was going to fight this thing as injured as she was. A flicker of doubt crept on her face, seeing the new monster made my stomach drop. I considered turning to run, but my legs wouldn't move. My body was shutting down, unable to do anything, but watch as the monstrous thing launched itself across the clearing straight at Jake. I couldn't do anything as it bore its weight down on her, forcing her to the ground. With a great strain, she kept at it above her, her small arms looking like they were at their breaking point, lifting up such a great mass. Arms of the monster grabbed at her, pinning her flailing legs down, trying to pull at her arms. Clawed hands started to dig into her stomach, tearing apart skin easily as she screamed. I felt bile rise to my throat as I stared in utter horror. Jake's organs were being torn from her while she was unable to do anything but scream. I thought that we had lost and that it was the end. The monster parted its head to drop one of Jake's legs that it had ripped from her into its horrible mouth when her screaming had stopped. In my utter confusion, I saw that she was smiling again, the smirk that made it seem like everything was going according to her plan. And gotcha, I heard faintly before her hair started to glow like embers. and then a blast of flame shot up from her directly into the amalgamation's open mouth. And I mean a blast. A tunnel of flame shooting upwards, bringing to hit the monster's head, was burned to nothing in seconds. The light was so bright that I could barely see, and the flames burned away leaves on trees at the start of the clearing. I had to duck under the coat trying to protect my face and eyes from the heat. I don't know how long I stayed under the coat, holding my little brother, saying to him that everything was going to be all right. I really wanted to just stop right then. The monsters were gone and we could rest, but I couldn't. I had to see what happened to Jake and if there was anything left of her. She was owed that much. Reassuring Jesse some more, I got out from under the coat, leaving him hidden. The air smelled awful. A mixture of burnt flesh and decaying meat made me gag. I composed myself to look around. Some small spots were flickering with flame. Bushes and leaves I hoped would go out before they turned into a real fire. I could still feel the heat in the air. The body of the monster was still, tossed aside and head melted off. Jake was next to it, half her body missing but strangely, one eye looking at me as if waiting for me to come closer. But she still couldn't be alive, right? A little help here, Scout. Her hoarse voice made me jump and run over to her. I was going to lose my dinner if I looked at what had happened to her stomach, so I focused on her face. I need you to do something for me. How are you? I started to ask, but she cut me off. You need to cut off my head and attach it to one of those creatures' bodies. One without broken arms or one you think looks most attractive. She let out a laugh, but it was so hoarse that it sounded like a cough. I don't think I can. I stuttered, feeling still on the verge of being sick. You said you were open to do anything if I saved you, right? With a final laugh and a smile still on her face, Jake stopped breathing. The remaining heat and the small fires flickered out at the same time as her. She was right, I did agree to do anything for her. Wording was important, as she said. I had to do this. I left the axe with Jesse, and when I went to grab it, I checked on him, making sure that he didn't see any of the dead around us. The first one that Jake had killed was close, so I picked it up under its arm and dragged it to the clearing. She had smashed its head, so I didn't need to cut it off, but cutting hers off proved to be an ordeal. I had to stop fairly often to dry heave and shake. I'll never forget the feeling in my hands of the axe cutting into bone. When she died, her smile was still on her face. I didn't know if it was because of her scar, or because her muscles hadn't loosened yet, but she was still smiling. It was a very surreal experience holding a smiling head in my hands. I put it on the creature's neck as fast as I could, while rubbing my palms on my jeans trying to remove the feeling. I wondered if I had to attach the head somehow, with thread or tape, but that question was answered seconds after Jake's head is connected to the dead body. The parts of her old body fell into piles of ash. The body that her head was loosely attached to burst into flames and blackened. The creature's body peeled away and Jake's appeared underneath. Her wounds were healed and she was very much alive as she sat up rubbing her neck. To my horror, she sat without anything covering her. Even the clothing that she had been wearing faded when her old body had. Even after I saw what Jake looked like under her coat, I doubted her gender. She was built like a male, meaning she had a completely flat chest. But seeing her exposed made me fully realize that she was in fact a girl. I bolted, grabbing her coat and tossing it on top of her in record speed. I didn't want my brother to see a weird naked woman on top of everything else that he saw that night. She didn't look embarrassed, instead she cackled at my flushed face. "Can we leave now, please?" I asked, trying to cut through her laughter. "All right, fine, don't be grumpy. I doubt anything's going to attack you two after all of this, but I'll still walk you out of the woods. If you're still frightened, you can hold my hand, little ones." "No thanks." We both shot at the same time. Oddly, Jake's smile fell a little as she looked a little offended by our rejection. "His legs are too short. Carry him. Jake ordered me talking about my brother. Jesse had been so shaken up that I doubted he could walk, and it would take us forever to get out of the woods. I hoped Jesse on my back and my cut hand still stinging. I kept the axe in my other hand for the walk back. And just in case, reaching out, Jake placed a hand on Jesse's head. He slumped forward, becoming dead weight on my back. I was about to lay into her when she waved me off. I just put the little one to sleep. He's seen enough this night. I can carry him if you wish. In fact, if you are not so attached, I can take him off your hands entirely. I'm aware of how bratty little brothers can be. I was exhausted from everything that happened. Even so, I refused to be teased by this woman. At least I hoped at the time she was teasing me. Don't touch him. I snapped and nearly took a step back when her smile fell. Jake was by far more terrifying than anything in the forest at that moment. Oh, and how are you going to stop me? You both promised me anything if I saved you. I can collect that at any time. I could take him right now or parts of him. He has such lovely blue eyes, and I'm looking for a new one to replace my own. Reaching out while she spoke, I was sure she would do something horrible if I didn't stop her. I couldn't think, so I acted on instinct. When her hand came closer, I turned my head to bite down on it as hard as I could. I felt hot blood come into my mouth, so hot that I thought my tongue would burn off, but I didn't let go. It tasted awful and it hurt, but I held fast. Another laugh from her and she easily pulled her hand away, the bite mark healing before my eyes. We don't owe you anything, I spat, trying to get the taste out of my mouth. I saved you, you were dead. You already got something from us. And that horrible sneer came back, an expression that made my heart nearly stop. You think I could die from something like that? I would be just fine. I only switched bodies for your sake. I would have healed, but a new body got you out of these woods faster. Besides, do you think I could ask just one thing of you? You agreed to anything, remember wording is important. I can ask anything of you until you both die. Even if you somehow do save my life, that does not mean that we're equal. That is the deal we made. Anything for your life. She looked so proud of herself, cackling away as I finally let my mistake fully sink in. That's not fair, I said, hating how my voice trembled. Fair, fair. Her voice had gotten louder and excited. Fair is a human concept. What do you think you made a deal with? Not human, and fair is not what I do. I had to do something. I had to think my way out of this. I didn't let my friends die only to have Jesse under Jake's thumb for the rest of his life. I at least needed to save him. That's what older siblings are for. I'll take Jesse's debt to you. I'll do anything for you, anything. You don't get him, I said so suddenly that it shocked myself. Oh yeah, now how is that fair for me? You were just talking about that word. Why would I take an offer that I lose on? Because fair is a human concept and you're not human. You shouldn't care about how fair the offer is. I could feel myself sweat as I waited for her reaction. She started to smile again, but this time it was a softer expression. She was laughing, but one that a proud parent would make. Fine, I'll take that unfair deal. You belong to me, but your little brother shall be spared. Let's get out of these woods. Your human smell is making me hungry. I relaxed for the first time and watched as Jake started to walk away, leaving me behind. Adjusting Jesse on my back, I followed after her to finally leave everything that happened behind. The walk out of the woods was uneventful. Jake got us back to the trail and walked in front, but I knew no other monsters would come for us. I was tired from carrying my sleeping brother but refused to stop or rest. When we got out, I stood in the parking lot, staring at Josh's car, trying to think of what to do next. Jake didn't leave and watched my silent breakdown. Give me the axe, she said, holding her hand out for it. Huh? I didn't even know that I was still holding it. I gave it to her, glad to be free of it. Nah, let me borrow your brother for a few seconds. That made me back away from her defensively. She let out a sigh. 3 people died. You humans are going to make a big deal out of it. I have a human that is a loose end for myself. I can make him confess to chopping up your friends with this axe. The police will be happy to have a closed case and I can get rid of that human. I don't do things for free and you cannot offer me anything more. This way I can do a cleanup and have it benefit myself, she explained. Those flyers, you knew that we were in danger. Why didn't you save us sooner? I asked, remembering the 4 of us at the camp looking at the odd papers. You didn't call me. I can't do things for free. I can't come until I'm asked. In fact, helping humans is not my job. I do this for fun. It's my fault. Tears came to my eyes. I had a cell phone. If I had called Jake sooner, we may all still be here. No, it's not anyone's fault. Like I said, creatures don't do fair. It's not fair that one of your group members was replaced and it killed your friends. You are not aware of the dark side of this world, so why would you bother calling for help if you didn't know the danger? I didn't know if she meant to try and cheer me up. It wasn't in her character, but it made me feel a small bit better. My friends were still gone, but at least I knew there wasn't much that we could do about it. I can alter your brother's memory. You and him left to pee in the woods, got lost, and when you came back, a crazy man had killed your friends. That is going to be the truth of what happened. Not a good truth, but one that we can handle. And I find children are bad actors. I can't have him rambling on about monsters. That made sense. I didn't want to trust her with my brother, but I did think in the long run it would be better for him to remember something a bit more down to earth. A therapist could deal with axe murder trauma. He would have more issues trying to get people to believe him about pale forest creatures instead. A few waves of Jake's hands over Jesse's forehead was all that it took to alter his memory for when he woke up. Why don't you change my mind too? I don't think you want me to know about strange creatures of the night. I asked but got a sharp kick to the shin. I don't do things for free. Jesse was so traumatized by what happened his memory changed on its own. You got it? I got the hint. Apparently helping Jesse was a freebie. One that we couldn't talk about and had to pretend Jake did nothing. And I can't change yours. You made a deal with me. Let's say that I made a deal with that I would save you for a nice dinner. And then you gave me that dinner and I just changed your memory of either not giving me what I was owed, or to you saying that you owe me something else. I hate the rules, but they keep some sort of order. If you make a deal with a creature, your memory cannot be altered. But some don't give a slightest care for the rules. Believe it or not, you got a good deal with me. I didn't want to consider the fact that Jake was really better than some monsters out there. She was a monster in her own right, but at least we made it out alive. Why did you save us? I asked. She mentioned that saving humans was not her job, and she had gotten hurt and doubted having her organs torn out was fun in the moment. She looked back and forth as if she was debating if she was going to answer me. I have a soft spot for kids, she admitted, finally looking almost embarrassed. Before departing, Jake told me to keep her number. She gave me a grim prediction that once a person encounters a supernatural creature, they are almost always killed by one even if they lived through the first encounter. Everything played out the way that she had said. A man confessed to killing Josh, Rebecca, and Tristan. They found their blood but no bodies. I fear my friend had been added to the amalgamation that Jake had killed, or turned into a pale creature that may still hunt in the forest. I stayed in my small and sleepy town. You would think that after what happened I would never go to the woods, but I am now a volunteer ranger. I'm the one who goes trying to find lost people. Sometimes I find them and sometimes I don't. Jesse turned out as fine as he could. He's going to therapy still, but he's starting to date, which makes me happy. All I wanted was for him to live a normal life. I could have easily thought this whole thing was a bad dream, something that my mind made up. I wanted to force myself to believe that. I have never seen anything strange since even in the woods. I've heard stories, but nothing like what I had gone through myself. I almost was able to settle down into a normal day-to-day life until she showed up to collect my debt. She told her to meet me in her motel room at 8 p.m. I don't know what she wants with me and I didn't ask, but I don't think I'll be seen again. I don't know why I'm bothering to write any of this down. Anybody would think this was fiction or that I lost it. I still arrived hours early to write this down in my old school notebook. Even if one person finds it, I want to warn them about making deals. If it was just me that night, I would have let myself get eaten, but Jessie made it out. I don't know what cost it is going to be for me, but it's almost too great. I now know that there are things far worse than death. If you ever find yourself in a situation that you can make a deal with a monster, and if you can take a second, then please think. You don't want to be in debt to these things. And if you do become indebted, keep in mind, they are not fair creatures and wording is very important. Sadly, that was all that was written in the journal. I was to leave the next morning so that I could not research the story further. Even now, I'm running out of time to write down what I read a year ago. My job does keep me busy. I had heard another story about this Jake recently. She was with a different creature and did not do much, but she was there. Maybe I can find more stories about her. I'll sit and listen to anything that comes my way, and I'll write down any more good tales that come along.